Well, in my view, a strong liberal state has three characteristics, three pillars. And in this, I have been influenced by Francis Fukuyama's book, The Origins of Political Order. These are, number one, an executive which is capable of quick, determined action. Second, that action has to be bounded by the rule of law. And third, that action has to be accountable to the people. These are the pillars of it. And this is how the original classical liberal state was conceived, and which inspired the American founding fathers as well as the Indian founding fathers. Now, these pillars sometimes tend to act against each other. In other words, an excess of accountability reduces, enfeebles the executive very often. And similarly, I'll give you an example, a road being built. Now, if everybody who's affected takes it to court, even though there's a law of eminent domain, but it will slow it down. So there is, and the present slowdown in some ways, the paralysis in decision-making in India is because of Anna Hazare's anti-corruption movement. No civil servant, politicians willing to put his signature on paper because they think that they might go to jail at some point in the future. So you need, therefore, to create a rules-based state is difficult. It's difficult, and you have to keep fighting to do it. And really, that's my idea of a liberal, strong state. It's not a Singapore. It has to be a liberal state. And as I said, India really, because of its history, could only be a liberal state. And by that I mean that the roots of that sort of liberal idea actually were established very early in India. In India, we've always had a weak state and a strong society. Unlike China, which has had a strong state and a weak society. So therefore, the history of India was a history of kingdoms competing, fighting, political disunity. History of China was a history of empires. We had four sort of empires in India's history. The Mauryas in the 3rd century BC, the Guptas in the 4th century AD, the Mughals, and then the British. But all these 4 empires were weaker than the weakest Chinese empire. And so in India, a person was defined by the society, not by the state. And even the king, the law was, or dharma, was prior to the king, and the king's job was to uphold dharma. And the interpreter of law was not the king, but the Brahmin, unlike Chinese legalism, as you know, where the emperor gave the law and the emperor interpreted the law. And in China, the emperor owned the property of the kingdom. In India, it's very clear early on that the king's share is 1/6. We call it Shatbhagan in Sanskrit. That's the tax rate. 15% is the tax rate of a fair state. And the king is told that if you try to be rapacious, your tax base will disappear to the neighboring kingdoms because people will move, whether they are farmers or whether they are merchants. So the roots, that's why I'm saying the roots of this liberal idea are very old in India. And that's also because the oppression never came from the state in India, unlike China and Russia and other countries. Oppression came from society. And the answer to that oppression was the Buddha, meaning a spiritual entrepreneur would come and people felt oppressed by the Brahmins, so he would start a new sect. And so we've had a series. The Buddha was just the most famous of our spiritual entrepreneurs. So this is the historic explanation of the Indian state and why India is a democracy and could only survive because it's an accumulating society. China is an assimilating society. In China, you had similar people who, the migrations took place into China as well as they did in India. China assimilated them in one Han nationality. In India, we accumulated them as subcastes. So we have 2,200 subcastes. So if China is a melting pot, India is more like a salad bowl or a biryani, as we call it.